Afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Bava Daf Tzadi Vav, and we are starting about 15 lines or so from the bottom of Tzadi Hey Amud Beis, and we'll be discussing today some of the halachos about shvach, if an item was improved, and or still some discussions about kinyanim as well, if an item was changed while in the property of a gazlan, what the implications would be in regards to that person taking ownership of that item. So let's get started. Again, 15 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Hey Amud Beis, the Gemara reads as follows. Amar Rav Ashi, Ki Havinan be Rav Kahana, when Rav Kahana analyzed the halacha that we just learned, that due to this interesting partnership, as it were, between the nigzal, the one who was stolen from, and the gazlan, the one who did the stealing, that if the gazlan improved the item that he stole from me, so on the one hand, it's my item, and at the same time, he did the one that he was the one who did the improving. So therefore, according to some shitas in the Gemara, as we saw yesterday, some people say that there's a relationship whereby the gazlan would get a percentage of the shvach. He wouldn't necessarily get all the shvach. It would be a pre-negotiated price, or more accurately, it would be a societally normal price, the market value. So in such a case, the question was like this: the Reb Shimon, that according to Reb Shimon, who holds that when a gazlan steals something and the gazlan improves the item, that he gets paid a percentage of the shvach that he brought about. So when we try to even things out with him, when we're paying him, how does he get paid? Does the shvach that the gazlan created get paid in dollars, or does it get paid in the item? Do we say b'dmei misalkinan le, o dilma mi bisra shakil? Which one is it? Does he get paid with dollars, or does he get paid with the actual flesh of the animal that he stole, whatever it is that he stole? Would he be paid with that actual animal? And says the Gemara, upashtana meha, we were able to answer this question of Rav Kahana from a memra of Rav Nachman. The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel, Shlosha shamin lahen hashvach umalin osan b'damim. There are three for whom we assess the shvach, and they get paid with dollars and cents. They don't get paid with the item itself. What are those cases? Ve'eluhain bechor lepashut. When we're dealing with a case of a bechor and a pashut, I am not the oldest boy in my family, so I would be considered a pashut. My older brother Howard would be considered a bechor. He would get pishnayim, and I would get 1x whatever he would get. I would get half of what he would get. So let's say that I'm a pashut. I'm the younger child, and I improved an item. So if I improve the item, this is a case scenario where the Mishnah says that we're shaman al shvach. We do assess that amount of money that it belongs to me because I did the shvach. The money does go to me, but he pays me bidamim. And then the Gemara says, another case like that would be uval chov lelokeach. When we have a discussion of a bal chov and a lokeach, that I am owed something, and then you bought it. Same scenario. If you who bought it from me, you made a shvach, so then you'd get paid in cash. And last but not least is ubal chov liyasomen. So what we see from all of these cases, without going into too much detail into these cases, is that you get paid with dollars and cents. So that answers the question that Rav Kahana had presented, that if a gazlan were to take an item and improve it, and he were to then be paid a shlish via some type of percentage, would he get paid with dollars, or would he get paid with the item itself? The Gemara answers from Rav Nachman that he would get paid with dollars and cents. The Gemara says, Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi, 6 lines from the bottom of the page, Mi Amar Shmuel, Bal Chov le Lokeach Yohiv le Shvach, that in a case scenario of a Bal Chov and a Lokeach, would we in fact say that he would get paid for the Shvach? We see that Shmuel did not say it that way. Shmuel said, Amar Shmuel, Bal Chov goves hashvach. The Bal Chov collects the item. The person who's really owed collects the item. But, and the Gemara doesn't say this, but what's implied from the Gemara is he does so without paying the Lokeach, the Shvach. So that seems to be against what Shmuel is saying, because Shmuel earlier just said, not that way. So therefore, the Gemara has a kasha. Amar le lo kasha, kan b'shvach hamagia lichsafayim, v'kan b'shvach she'en magia lichtafayim. One is talking about where literally it translates as with praise, that it's appreciation, that reaches one's shoulders, which means that it's a fully complete shvach. So it's not just I stole your animal, but it's butchered and ready to eat, full gzela. and full shvach. I stole it and I fully improved it. Your animal's ready to be eaten. But the other case is kan b'shvach she'enu magilach define. So that's a discussion as to when would we say that there is shvach paid and when is there no shvach paid. And according to this distinction, Shmuel would say that there is shvach paid when that which you, the gazlan, stole, fully improved and it's ready to be used. Then we would say that the shvach is going to be paid. Masha'en kain, if the improvement is only partial, you would not get paid. That we see, we don't see, but they saw back in the day in the Bezdin of Shmuel that it would happen regularly, that there was shvach and Shmuel would not force people to pay that. So it says the Gemara, Amar le, lo kasha. Don't worry. Turning to the top of Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph, and as you can see, we have a little bit of a thicker blot here and a significantly thicker blot. It actually moves pretty quickly today, and we'll be stopping at the last word of Tzadi Vav Amud Beis. So let's pick up at the top of the page. How then do we understand Shmuel? Shmuel says, Ha demasik be kashir ara v'shivcha. One is talking about a case where that which the person is owed is a combination of the cost of the land plus the shvach. In that case, the shvach is paid. And halav ha de lo masik be ela kashir ara. When would the shvach not be paid? When the amount of money that needed to be transferred was only the cost of the ara without the shvach. Amar le, the Gemara says, and this is quoting a machlokas, a bit of a complex machlokas from Bava Metzia. The Gemara says, that if in fact there is liquid money for the lokeach, for the buyer, so then lo mati mesalik le bal chov, then you're not allowed to pay off the person with a bal chov. You have to give actual item. So that makes sense according to the above answer where we're talking about ara and shivcha. That's shapir. Then we can understand the previous answer that explains the answer, the sheet of Shmuel. But if it's the case that a person can actually not pay back the item itself, in this case ara, and really he can pay cash for the whole thing, then the lokeach can say to the balcho, in a case where I do have money, I could pay you for everything. Hashta havli giyura de ara shir shivchai. So then you can leave me over a little bit of a parcel of land. So therefore, the Gemara says that our distinction for Shmuel doesn't really work very well according to this machlokas, or this half of the machlokas from the Gemara in Bava Metzia. The Gemara responds a quarter of the way down, 10 lines down or so, on Tzadi Vav Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, that this piece of property from the answer on the top line of the page was an aputiki. The Amar Le lo yehelach piraon elamizeh. You have to collect only from this piece of property. So there, the case was unique. The case was different, and therefore that explains why this would work even according to all shitas from the machlokas case in Bava Metzia. The Gemara goes on to a din of Rabbah. Amar Rava, 2 lines before the wide lines. Gazal v'hishpiach umachar. If I steal something of yours and I improve it and I sell it, or Gazal v'hishpiach v'horish. Or if I steal something and improve it and then it's given as an inheritance to children, Masha hishpiach machar. The shevach is considered to be given over in an acquisition to whoever you're selling it to, and Masha hishpiach horish. That which you've appreciated the item and increased its value, and then you gave it over b'Yerusha, that also gets passed on to the children. What would happen if the Gazlan sold it to someone? So let's say I steal something from Ruvain and I sell it to you. So if I'm selling it to you and it's in your property, and while it's in your property, it improves. What do we say in regards to the shevach? Again, I'm a thief. I sold it to you and it improved while it was in your property. We discussed already what happens when it's in the property of the Gazlan. But what happens if the Gazlan sells it and now it's in your property? So Basar de Baya Hadar Pashta, Rava asked, after he asked the question, he also provided an answer. Ma Machar Rishon Lasheni. What was the first person selling the second person? Namely, what was the Gazlan selling when he sold this item to the lokeach? Anything that would have in theory been a shvach, been something that would have been a gain for the lokeach, the same thing will be true in regards to the case of mecher and in regards to the case of Yerusha. And therefore, the Gemara seems to say that If I'm the ganav and I sell it to you and there's a shvach while it's in your property, you're the beneficiary of the shvach. The Gemara asks, Boy Rava, Ishbiach Oved Kochavim Mahu. What if, while it's in the property of a goy, the value goes up? Would we say that the shvach is something that's owed to the goy? The Gemara says, you clearly haven't been listening to the last many blot, because that certainly doesn't make sense. Amarle Ravachami Difti Leravina, Takanta Leoved Kochavim, Neku Venaved. We made a takana. We made an institution that enabled a person to do tshuva. We said that you can pay back the shvach. We wanted to do that because of takanas hashavim, so that we can enable a gazlan to actually do tshuva. We'll let him keep the shvach, even though really it doesn't belong to him. But that's the only way he's going to do tshuva. So then we have to enable him to do that. But by an oved kochavim, it's not our responsibility to ensure that they do tshuva. By a yid, that is the case. So here the Gemara says, Omar le lo tzricha kigon dezav ne'li Yisrael. Actually, what we're talking about is a multi-layered case where I sold it to a guy who then sold it to a Yisrael. So I'm a Jew, I sold it to a guy, and then the guy sold it to a Yid. So says the Gemara, okay, but that third party, that second Jewish man who purchased from a guy, still, the din should be that it's still going to be like an oved kochavim, that just like the previous owner who was a goy was not able to be the beneficiary of the shavach, the same thing should be true of the yid who purchased it from a goy. Because at the end of the day, when we find out who owns it and we have to return it, the goy would have had a din of no shvach. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha kigon de gazal Yisrael. Really, it was stolen by a yid. V'zavna nehale, and it was then sold to a goy. V'ishbicha oved kochavim, and then it was improved by a goy. V'hadar oved kochavim v'zavna liYisrael. What would the din be in such a case? The Gemara says, Mi amrinan, do we say that kevan de meikari Yisrael, the hadar Yisrael, since the initial gazlan was a yid and the final owner was a yid, therefore abde rabbanon takanta, we do institute the din of takanas hashavim, and therefore the yid, can keep the shvach even though he purchased from a guy. Odilma kevan deika oved kochavim beemtza lo avdu le rabbanon takanta. And the Gemara says, take you. Or do we say that no, that because there was a goy in this process, it interrupts the takana of takanas hashavim, and we don't allow for it to be employed here, and we don't know the answer to that question. Now we're going to be discussing what is considered a significant change, and we'll see that there are a couple of parameters. First is there a shinui shem? Does the item change? And well, just giving you one example to kind of foreshadow, if I cut down a palm tree and then I look at it, I'll say, oh, look, there's a palm tree lying on the ground. That's still a palm tree. That's not shinui shem. We also want to make sure that it is something that's not choser levriyato, something that can or cannot go back to its original state. With those things in mind, we'll be able to understand this Gemara better. Amar Rav Papa, 2/3 of the way down. If I steal a palm tree from you, and I take a saw, a two-man saw, and I cut down the whole palm tree. So what's the din there? Says the Gemara, Afal gav de shaja me'ara le'ara didei. Even though I picked up the tree, I cut it, picked it up, moved it from your property into mine, lo kani. That's not considered a kinyan. Why? My taima? Because me'ikara dikli mikri, v'hashtanami dikla mikri. Because it's always called a palm tree. And therefore, even though there was shinui rishus, but because there wasn't shinui shem, that's not called a kinyan. Next, dikla v'oved gubi lo kani. If I steal a tree from you and I cut it into blocks, into thick pieces of wood, then the din is lo kani, because hashtami as gubi de dikla mikri, they're still called a palm tree. They're just called blocks of a palm tree, but still that's what it's called. Gubi, what if I had blocks? V'avdinhu kishuri kani, and then I make them into boards? No, now that's a shinui shem. And because there's a shinui shem, I've made them into whatever, pieces of furniture. I made them into plywood. I cut them into straight different shapes, whatever. But now it's not, no one looks at it and says, oh, that's a palm tree. They say, oh, that's a shelf. That's a slab of wood, whatever. If I had kshuri, if I had these kind of pieces of clean cut pieces of wood, kshura ravravi, if I had large ones and I cut them in half, avdinu kshuri zutre, and I make them smaller, also lo kani, those are the same thing. Avdinu kitsu saisa kani. If, however, I took those and I made them into smaller boards of a different shape that now have a new name, so then the halacha is kani. That would be the din. Amar Rava, Haiman de Gaza luliva, if I steal a lulav, Be'avdinu hutzi, and I make it into hutzi by peeling off the leaves. Kani, because you've changed it and can't put it back. They have a different name as well. To make kar luliva mikri, here's the shinui shem. It used to be called a lulav. Behashta hutzi, now it's called something else. Hutzi ve'avdinu chufya, if I take the individual now peeled off leaves of a lulav and I make them into a chufya, which is a broom. That's how the brooms of old were made. They would take strands of a lulav and tie them around the stick, and a very simple model, effective. So then, kani, that would work because meikaru hutzi v'hashta chufya. It used to be called the leaves of a palm tree, and now it's not. Chufya v'avda sharshura. If I had the broom, and instead I turned it into rope, I wove it together into rope. Lo kani, because I can always undo that. My time of the hadar sasar le v'havya chufya, because at the end of the day, it's just long pieces of the lulav branch, and they can always be undone. 2 lines from the bottom on Tzadi Vav Maral. By Rav Papa, Nechmakat Yomes. We of course know the halacha says it relates to sukkahs, that if the tiomes, the centermost leaf of the lulav, if it splits, so we know halacha lemaisa that if it splits enough, then the lulav won't even be kosher. Baruch Hashem, most of our lulavim are excellent, and they really don't have these kinds of issues. But when kids play with them, when the lulav points straight into a wall, then these things can happen. But how does that play a role in regards to shinui Hashem? So says the Gemara, if you have nechlakat yomes mahu, and the Gemara says, Tashma, let's see, the Amar Rabbi Masun, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Nitla HaTiomes Pasal. We know that in regards to Hilchos Sukkah, if the Tiomes was removed, if it was cut, severed, not just split, but if it was severed, the halacha is that it's pasal. Turning to the top of Tzadi Vav Amud Beis. Therefore, my lavu adin lenechlaka. Shouldn't it also be the case that because it's pasal when you cut it, shouldn't it also be pasal when you split it? And therefore, perhaps in our case, maybe we would say that it's considered a shinui shein. The Gemara says, "Lo nit l'shayni." You are not able to compare the case of nechlaka tiomes, the splitting vertically of the tiomes, versus cutting off the top of the tiomes horizontally, and that's because the case of Rabbi Masan on the bottom of the page of nit l'hatiomes, where it was cut across the top, that's different than a case of nechlaka, where it was actually split, or perhaps the exact opposite. Some say the Amre Tashma. We have a brisa. The Amr of Masan. It's not a brisa. We have a memra. The Amr of Masan. Amr of Yeshua ben Levi. Nechlakat yomes nasa kimishan not lo pasal shmaminu. This presentation of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi seems to perfectly equate the nechlakat yomes to the case of netila yomes. And if that were to be true, then that means that the vertical splitting of the tiomes or the horizontal severing of the top of the tiomes are halachically exactly the same. And therefore, it would also be the case that it would be considered a shinui shein in regards to kinyanim for gzela as well. Very good. So 4 lines down, Tzadi Vav Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Amar Papa, Haiman de Gazel Afra Mechare Va'abda Levinta. If I steal dirt from your backyard and I make them into a brick, lo kani. That's not considered a significant shinui. A little surprising. Why not? My time, go get a hammer and go break it down. Remember also that back in the day, it was very common that people used mud bricks. And mud bricks were packed together and they were heated in some type of kiln or oven, but it wasn't difficult for them to be brought back to their original elements just by shattering them. So therefore here too, if I steal dirt and I make a brick, because I could always break the brick and bring it back down to its elements, so therefore lo kani. The hadar mashvele afra, I can always make the brick back into dirt again. What if I did the reverse? Levinta, I had a brick, va'avde afra, I stole a brick out of your yard and I crushed it down with a hammer into dirt. So then kani, that's considered to be a kinyan. Why is it that when I take dirt and make a brick, it is not a kinyan? But when I take a brick and make it into dirt, it is a kinyan. My amras, because says the Gemara, what was the other option? Dilma hadar va'avar levinta. You're going to remake a levena, a brick from the same thing, but the features of that new brick are not going to be the same as the features of the old brick. Hai levinta achrisi upanim chadashus ba'olakan. And this is totally new. So the levena, we had brick number 1, and then I broke it down, and then when I reformed that powder back into a brick, it was a different brick, even if it's the same material, but it doesn't look the same. The texture is not exactly the same. The size is not exactly the same, even though all the particles are there. However, in the other way, that's not true. In the other way, when you steal someone's afar and you make a brick, I can always bring it back to afar. Rav Papa continues about 10 lines down on Sadi Vavamid Beis. Haiman de Gazal Nascha Mechabre Avidzuze. Similar to our previous case, if I steal a block of silver or a bar of silver, and I make it into coins, the halacha is lokani. My time up because hadar avi lahu nascha. I could remelt everything down, and it'll be the same. It'll be just like it was before, which is a block of silver. But if I had zuze, if I had coins, that's what I stole from you. And ve'avdin hu nascha, then kani. That actually is considered a kinyan, my amris, because what's the other option? Hadar avi lahu zuze. You're going to remake the coins. They'll never be the same exact coins. Not possible. And not even the same particles in this case, because from one block you are going to make many different coins, and therefore not all of the particles would be the same. It's just not the same coins. Panim chadashos ba'olaka. Let's say shechimi ve'avdinhu chadati. Shechimi is what we would have called in our language tarnished or oxidized silver. So if I take that ve'avdinu chadati and I make new ones, so lokani, that's not considered to be a kinyan. But chadati ve'avdinu shchimi. But if I take new ones and I turn them into, or I allow them to become tarnished, so then kani, that does work, because after all, my amris, what could you say at the end of the day? Hadar avi lehu chadati. There's no way you're going to be able to make them perfectly brand new, because meida yadia she shichmaihu. Everyone knows that it still was tarnished at some point. Obviously, our metals are very strong nowadays. Our coins can be brushed basically to look new, most likely, minus indentations. And probably our chemicals are a little bit better. But nevertheless, back in the day, if you had a new coin and you let it get tarnished, that's considered to be a kinyan, because there's no way you could clean it in such a way, again, back in the day, to the point that people would think that it's actually new. We have another issue nowadays, which is that our coins are minted with a date on them. So maybe anyways, that would not change anything, even though the value is the same, but it's not the same date. I'm just throwing out a question, don't know the answer. We're about a quarter of the way down at the 2 dots. We had said, Zehaklal kol hagazlanim mishalmin kishas hagzela. We had said in our Mishnah many days ago that all gazlanim have to pay from the shas hagzela. If I stole something on January 1st at 2 p.m. and then a month later I'm caught, I have to pay based on January 1st at 2 p.m. The Gemara says, whenever we see the language of Zehaklal in a Mishnah, you can almost always anticipate the Gemara is going to ask, what else were you trying to add? So la'asuye mai, says the Gemara, la'asuye hada amar Rabbi Lo, ganav tleh v'naseh ayil. If I steal a tleh and it ages and turns into a ram, it just gets older. Egel v'naseh shor, I have a calf and it turns into a cow. Naseh shinui biyado ukena'o. That means that a kinyan took place while it was in your property and it was nikne. Tavachu machar. And if at that point you did tavachu machar, you slaughtered it or you sold it, so then you would not be chayiv kefil or daled v'hei. Why? Because the kinyan already took place, and because the kinyan took place, you don't. It's now you own it, and because you own it, if tavachu machar, shalohu toveach, shalohu mocher, it's all his. And the Gemara tells a brief story as we head to the next Mishnah. Ahu Gavra, there was a man, the Gazal Padna de Torah Mechabre. He stole a pair of shvarim, of oxen, from his friend. Azal, Karabuhu Karva, he took this animal and he plowed a field with the animal, and Zarabuhu Zara, and he used the animal to help plant seeds. Leso Fahadrin Hulamare, and at the end of the day, the animal was returned to its master. We're on the first of the very long lines of Tzadi Vavamid Beis, almost halfway down. Asa Lakame to Rav Nachman, they took this case scenario. I walked in and said, yep, definitely, I stole your animal. I used it to plow my field. I used it to plant my field. Amar Lahu Zilu Shumu Shivcha De'ashbach. Go and assess what shevach there was when Phil stole your animal. Go assess the shevach. Amar Le Rava. Rava says back, I don't understand. Rava was the next generation after Rav Nachman, so this was kind of like a question, the Torah being a Talmud. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. The Torah Ashbach, was it only the animal that caused for the Shabach? The Ara lo Ashbach, the dirt, the minerals in the dirt played no role? Of course, The animals don't make things grow. The ground makes things grow. So how can you say that we're going to go assess the shevach of the growth when what the animal did certainly had a certain value, but it wasn't the reason that everything grew in the field? So Amar, Rav Nachman said back, Mika Amina Neshaimu Kule. You're right, Pasha, you're right. I don't mean that everything that subsequently grows is dependent on the plowing and the planting of the shvarim that you stole, but rather Palga Kamina. Really, I'm just saying you should pay half. The Gemara does assume that if an animal plows and plants and then something grows, that half of the growth, halachically speaking, is due to the shvarim, and half of the growth is due to nature, teva, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Le, the Gemara says, so gzelahu v'kahadra be'ena. It seems to be that you still need to give back the item as is. Titnan, we have a Mishnah. Kol hagazlanim mishalmen kishas hagzela. So forget about the shvach. Says the Gemara, Amar Le, lo amin alach ki yasivna bedina. Didn't I tell you that when I'm sitting in Beznin, lo temali midi, don't speak? Sometimes I say this to my children. I'm in the middle of doing something. This is not the time to talk. So he said to him, I'm in the middle of giving a psak din. Don't interrupt me. I'm in the middle of talking. So the Gemara says, the Amar huna chavrin Eloi, that Ana Ushvor Malka Achi Bedina, that I'm knowledgeable. I'm a dayan. I know what I'm talking about. I don't need your help. After all, what you don't know about this guy in this particular case was Hai Inish Gazlana Atiko, the guy that we're dealing with, the defendant. He's been in front of us 100 times in Bezdin. The guy is a serial ganav. He's a serial thief. But you know, say this guy needs a particular knas. Therefore, for him, things are a little bit different. Don't interrupt me while I'm adjudicating a case. Fascinating. A little bit more than halfway down, a Mishnah, and then we'll be heading toward the end of the page. The Gemara Mishnah says as follows: Gazal behema v'hiskina. If I steal an animal and the animal ages in my property, or avadim v'hiskino, or if I steal your eved and he gets older in my property, v'shalem kshas hagzela, whatever their value was at the moment that I stole it. Whenever I get caught down the road, I have to pay back lemafreya retroactively to whatever the cost was of that behema or that eved from day one, from moment one that I stole it. Rav Meir argues with the Tanakama. This Gemara we saw yesterday out of context. The Gemara says, Rav Meir Omer, be'avadim, when it comes to avadim, because avadim, as we saw yesterday, are equivalent to karka, and karka is eina nigzeles. You can't really steal karka. So Omer lo hareshal chalafanecha. I never really stole it in the first place, because you can't steal karka. Take your eved back, and there's no difference in payment. It's not kishas hagzela. You just return the person without any assessment. We don't care what the assessment is, because you're always going to be giving back the eved in full. So that is what Rav Meir says about avadim. The Mishnah continues, Gazal matbea v'nistak. If I steal a coin, and then after I steal the coin cracks. Peiros v'hir kivu, I steal fruits and they rot. Yayin v'hichmitz, I stole a barrel of wine, and then it passed its expiration date and turned to vinegar. Mishalim kshas hagzela, I always go back to the original moment, and I, the ganav, the gazlan, will have to pay you for whatever the cost was of the items I stole at the time that I stole it. Matbea v'nifsal. Let's say that I took a coin and then v'nifsal, it became puzzle, namely it exited. It was no longer a coin that's used in circulation. This happened in Eretz Yisrael, where they stopped with the smaller agurot, that those were no longer used anymore. Or truma v'nitmeis. The item looks exactly the same food. It just became tamei. Chametz v'avar laba pesach, which we know, of course, is usher to use. So here too, the food looks exactly the same. Nothing changed. Or behema v'nis abda ba'avera, a behema that had an aspiration for a holier purpose, but it was used in a way that it shouldn't have been. Oh, shenifsala me'al gabe mizbeach, or for whatever reason it became a puzzle for the mizbeach. Oh, shahisa yotza li sakel, or if it had a din of skila, omer lo hareshal chalafanecha, take it as is. In all of these latter cases of the Mishnah, the reason why the din is the way that it is because nothing physically changed in these items at all. You couldn't tell by looking at it that anything happened. All right, let's jump into the Gemara. Amar Rav Papa lo hiskina mamish. That when our Mishnah says that a behema became old, we don't mean that it aged into another age bracket, another decade, another plateau of age. That's not what's happening here. All we're saying is ela afilu kachsha, even if it became weaker, says the Gemara, v'ha'anan hiskinatnan. Okay, but that's not what our Mishnah says. Our Mishnah says that there's an aging that's taking place. Says the Gemara, Kachsha Kigon Hiskina. When our Mishnah says at the beginning of our Mishnah that Gazal Behema V'Hiskina, what we're talking about is where there was a krisha, where there was a weakness of the animal that won't then go back to like it was, the same that age doesn't go backwards. So if there's a damage, let's say there's a permanent hip injury of the animal, and it's always going to be that way from now on, never to be fixed. We don't do hip replacements on cows. So if there's a permanent damage to the animal, or let's say there's an amputation of part of the leg, that's permanent. Just like age won't reverse, so too the leg won't grow back. Those are the kinds of damages, the lohadar bari, which will never go back to health, will never go back to like they were. So all of those are begeder v'hiskina, that anything that's similar to age and that the damage is permanent, that is the din of our Mishnah, that in those cases you're mishalim kishas agzela, like the Tanakama says. Amar le Mark Shisha Bereder of Chizal Ravashi. Hachi Ka'amra Mishmed Rav Yochanan. We learned something in the name of Rav Yochanan. Afilu Ganav Tlev Nase Ayil, Egel V'Nase Shor, Nase Shinui Biyado Ukena'o. We had said that if an animal aged in your property from a tlet to an ayil, or from an egel to a shore, that's considered a shinui, and the gazlan now owns it. And therefore, because the gazlan now owns it, if tavachu machar, if he then either slaughtered or sold that animal, shalohu tovech shalohu mocher. Amar le, didn't I tell you, says the Gemara, lava mina lach, lo tachlif gavre, don't mix up the names of people when you're quoting things. Hahu mishmed Ravi La Itmar, you quoted the wrong name. You should have quoted it in the name of Ravi La. We weren't questioning any tochen of the Gemara here. The Gemara is just bringing a musar that when we quote things, we should be quoting things in the right name. Not easy to do because it requires that we remember names. I know for myself, certainly in learning Gemara and pretty much everything else, my brain doesn't really normally do that. I forget a lot of those things about who said what. So I'm definitely guilty of that. But the Gemara is reminding us that it's an important thing to do. That brings us to the two dots, about 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. Yesterday, when we saw this quote of our Mishnah of Gazal Behema V'Hiskina, Avadim V'Hiskina, we saw that there was a machlokes in regards to how to understand that Gemara. Was it the way that it was presented in our Mishnah, or no, the way that Rav had understood, or the way that Rav was taught this Mishnah was actually quite different, where the shitas were reversed. So now we're going to learn that sugya in regards to which is the correct language. Rav Meir Omer, Rav Meir says, Be'avadim Omer Harei Shalcha Lefanecha. That is the presentation that we have in our Mishnah. That Rav Meir is the one who said that avadim are not really sellable. They're really similar to karka. V'karka ein in nigzelas. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chanina bar Avdimi, Amar Rav halacha k'Rav Meir. The Gemara says that we hold like Rav Meir. Now, of course, that's a big problem because we have a famous principle in Psak and the Gemara that Yachid v'Rabim halacha kirabim, that when it comes to a machlokes in any of the Mishnayos, the din is that we always paskin like the majority opinion. So how can Rav hold like Rav Meir? Says the Gemara, Rav shavik rabbanon va'avid kirav Meir. Rav is going to ditch the opinion of the rabbis, who are the rabbim, and hold like the opinion of Rav Meir, who is a Yachid. You're not allowed to do that. How could Rav possibly say such a thing? Amre, the reason why Rav could say such a thing is because Mishum de Braisa Ipchatanya. What Rav meant when he said that we hold like Rav Meir is that with what you call Rav Meir in the Mishnah, I hold as the Rabbanon. That's really what's happening, is that Rav had a different version of our Mishnah, whereas our Mishnah says that the Tanakama holds everything is Kishas Hagzela, and Rav Meir holds that by Avadim they're like Karka and Hareshal Chalafanecha. It's the opposite for Rav. So when Rav says that the din is like Rav Meir, he's just saying according to your version of the Mishnah, Rav Meir is the name that you wrote by the Shita that Avadim are like Karka. I hold that way, which really, in his world, was the Rabbanah. So no machlokes really. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make sense. Amar Amri Mishum de Braisa Ibchatanya. We had said that the reason why Rav argued with our Mishnah is because he had a Braisa. The Gemara says, well, that's great, but there's a hierarchy in the quality of sources, and a Mishnah is higher in quality, in its authenticity, in its accuracy, than a Brisa. So the Gemara therefore says, V'Rav Shavik Mas Nisan V'Avid Kibraisa. Will Rav ignore a Mishnah and say that the Brisa is right over a Mishnah? That doesn't make sense. We know that Rebbe put together all of the Mishnayos super carefully, and the Brisas are a little bit more haphazard. In fact, Brisas are not found in any one book of collections. Mishnayos have Mishnayos, Toseftas have Toseftas. We don't have a book of Brisas. Brisas are just found scattered throughout Shas. So because that's the case, there should be a higher nod given to the Mishnah over the Brisa. So even if Rav has a Brisa that's opposite our Mishnah, why would he paskin that way? Why would he say that the text of the Brisa is better than the text of the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Rav mas nisen nami epchatani. Rav, when he learned in yeshiva, the Mishnah that we just learned, he didn't have the Mishnah that we just learned the way that we have it. He had it the exact opposite, where the Chachamim were the ones who said that Avadim are like Karka, and Karka is Ein and Exelis. The Rav Shavik mas nisen, the Avid Kibraisa, the Gemara, so sorry, hold on one second. Oh yeah, sorry. Umay time de Rav the apich mas nisen mekame the Brisa. Why is it that Rav would change the language of the Mishnah and because of the Brisa? Why would he modify the Mishnah to match his Brisa? Adarabba, nepuch leBrisa mekame mas nisen. So he should have done something different. He should have flipped the language of the Brisa to match with the language of the Mishnah. Amrei Rav nami mas nisen ipcha isne. He had everything taught differently. The Brisa was taught the way that Rav understood it, and the Mishnah was taught the opposite of how we had it. By Sema, another possible answer is that really, you're right, we're following the Brisa, and really the Mishnah is the way we have it, but it was two Brisas against our one Mishnah, and this is how the Gemara explains that. By Sema, 6-7 lines from the bottom of the page, Kilo apich chada mikame chada. When is it that we say that a Mishnah is more powerful than a Brisa? That's when it's one source against one source. But chada mikame tarte apich. But if we have a Mishnah on the one side that has the text in one way, but we have two Brisas against that one Mishnah, so two Brisas are more authentic and accurate, and therefore apich, we should switch them. What's the second Brisa that seems to agree with Rab? The Tanya, the Brisa says, Hamachlif para b'chomer v'yalda. If there is machlef para b'chamor, there's a switching of a cow and a chamor b'yalda. V'chein hamocher shivchasa b'yalda. If someone is selling a maidservant and there's a birth, ze omer birshusi yalda. During the transition, this is when it took place. When I was handing something to you, or in the process of the animal being given over to your property, we don't know where the animal gave birth. So this is a discussion. Ze omer birshusi yalda v'halashosik. If I say the animal was born in my property, and you say, okay, I guess it was. So then zachaba, then the person who claims birshusi yalda gets to keep the animal. However, ze omer eini yodea v'ze omer eini yodea. If both of us just aren't sure, full integrity, really don't know, so then yachloku, that's the first Mishnah in Maseches, Bava Mitzia, where yachloku, where we split things. Ze omer birshusi v'ze omer birshusi. If both people say it was in my property that the birth took place, and the other person says the same exact claim, yishava hamocher shebirshusa yolda. The mocher will get to make the shvua first. Lefi shekol nishbain batorah nishbain v'lo mishalmin divrei Reb Meir. The Reb Meir was of the opinion of nishbain v'lo mishalmin, that you can make a shvua, you don't need to pay, and then he'll get the animal. V'chachamim omrim. Check this out. This is our shita that shows that Rav is right. The chachamim say, lo al ha'avadim v'lo al ha'karkos. What do we see over here? We see that there's an equivalence between Eved and Karka, which is exactly what Rav said, the Chachamim said. That's why even if you want to say that the Mishnah's text is correct, but Lamaisa, there are two Brisas like the Shita of Rav, and therefore we should be able to change our opinion. Says the Gemara, just one last question. Hi, halacha ki Reb Meir, halacha ki Rabbanan mi bailei. If you look back in the beginning of our Gemara, when we talk about the din of Rav, Rav said that the din's like Rav Meir. Why would Rav say the din is like Rav Meir? Say the din is like the Rabbanan. So the Gemara responds, according to you, who have a flipped Mishnah, and you learned it wrong, like our Mishnah is presented here, according to Rav. Our Mishnah, according to Rav, is incorrect, where it says that Rav Meir is the one who holds of Karka, that an Ebed is like Karka. According to that, you're wrong in regards to your names, but you should just know the din is that Avadim are like Karka, and therefore halacha ki Reb Meir. So just to summarize this last piece, The language of our Mishnah is subject to a bit of a discussion, and Rav would actually change things around. Whereas in our Mishnah, it speaks about the idea that Rav Meir holds that an Eved is Karka. Rav would say that that's not correct. It's the wrong name. It's not Rav Meir. It's the Rabbanan. We'll stop right here. Emir Hashem will pick up tomorrow in person at the very top line of Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Aleph, very top line. That's where we'll pick up with Umi Amar Rav. And that's it for tonight. Wishing you all